So to begin this Q&A, I want to, and in this vein, in the spirit of Tisha B'Av today, I want to start here with this question that goes as follows. Dear Rabbi, I know you would like us to celebrate our birthdays on a Hebrew date, but I have a small problem. I was born on Tisha B'Av, and it's kind of hard to celebrate my birthday on such a sad day. What do you suggest? Good question. So, by the way, I have to clarify, this is not Shelly Basha. We mentioned last night at our services where Shelly attended that it was her birthday. So it's not Shelly Basha asking the question. It's someone else. Someone was born on Tisha B'Av. How could they celebrate on such a sad day? They don't really like their birthday so much, and certainly not their Hebrew birthday that we should indeed celebrate. So I think it goes, to answer this question, we really have to go to the root of Tisha B'Av. And I want to mention two very quick Talmudic stories. Story number one speaks of Rabbi Akiva, who was walking with his peers, Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Lazar, and he was walking on Mount Herzl, Mount Tzofim, on the Mount Scopus. That's what it's called in English, Mount Scopus. I'm sure many of you have been there. And from Mount Scopus, you can actually see the site of the temple. And he was walking there shortly after the destruction of the temple, and he saw the Mount Temple in ruins. And he saw that foxes were trampling upon the holiest site. After Rabbi Akiva and his generation had experienced really the holiest experience on this Temple Mount. And his peers began to cry, and Rabbi Akiva began to laugh. So they asked Rabbi Akiva, how can you laugh? We're witnessing the site that was once filled with holiness, filled with life, and now lies in ruins, and you are laughing? He says, well, how can you cry? Explain to me how we cry. Well, we're crying because this is sad to witness such a site turn into such a terrible destruction. And Rabbi Akiva responded, well, this is exactly why I laugh, because I've waited until this day for the fulfillment of the destruction of the temple that will give room to the fulfillment of the prophecy that speaks about the construction of the third temple. My eyes are not towards the past. My eyes are towards the future. In that future, I see the rebuilding of the temple with the third temple that will come down from heaven right there on that side. And therefore, I laugh. That's story number one. Story number two speaks of how Titus, who was the representative of the Roman Empire, came and destroyed the second temple, how when he walked into the Holy of Holies, he saw one of the most bizarre scenes, ironic scenes. And that is that the ark that housed the broken pieces of the tablets, that had cherubim on top of it, those two baby faces that were facing one another, he saw them indeed facing one another. Now, the Talmud teaches us in a different place that when those cherubim were not facing each other, miraculously they would turn around. It meant that God was not happy with the Jewish people. When they were facing each other, it meant that God was happy with the Jewish people. Now, when he walked into the Holy Temple and the Holy of Holies, where the Ark was housed, he saw that the cherubim were facing each other. And of course, this brings to mind the question of how come? How could that be? The destruction of the temple is God's expression, seemingly, of his wrath towards the Jewish nation. You don't deserve a temple, therefore I'm destroying it. So how could it be that the cherubim were facing each other, which meant the exact opposite, which meant that God was happy with these people? Wasn't him destroying the temple expressing to us that he's not happy with us? So how could the cherubim face each other? They should have been not facing each other. They should have been expressing this idea that God is not happy with us, the same idea that seemingly, again, the destruction of the temple is demonstrating. And the answer that the sages give and that many commentaries give is that the destruction of the temple is not a negative event per se. The destruction of the temple might have been a very painful sight, might have been a very a time in Jewish history in which we suffered profoundly. But that in of itself, from God's perspective, is not negative. It is, as Rabbi Akiva pointed out, it's just preparing the grounds for greater and better building, for greater and better times. That's what Tisha B'Av really represents. It's not a time of mourning only, mourning with a U. It's a time also of mourning without a U, of knowing that that morning, that day in which the sun will shine again, is coming very, very soon. With each and every day, we are coming closer to that day. With each and every mitzvah, we are bringing that day closer to us. So yes, the temple was destroyed and we mourn the pain and the destruction, but we also are encouraged by the destruction of the temple because we know that it is a sign for greater and better days. So I'm going back to the question that was asked. My birthday, the person was asking, my birthday is on Tisha B'Av, and what was it right here? I was born on Tisha B'Av, and it's kind of hard to celebrate my birthday on such a sad day. What do you suggest? I say to you, and I say to everyone, well, let's go to the very root of Tisha B'Av. Actually, you were born on the best day of the Jewish calendar. You were born on the day in which the cherubim were facing each other. You were born on the day in which Rabbi Akiva laughed. You were born on the day that prepared the grounds for the third temple that is to come, hopefully, speedily. You were born on the day in which God planted his seeds of redemption. That's when he planted these seeds, today. So we were born on the best day. And I would dare say that I'm a believer that God doesn't make us, doesn't give us birthdays just randomly. We weren't born on a Monday just randomly. We were born on the 17th of Shavat, if that is your birthday, randomly. We weren't born on Tisha B'Av just randomly. God picked our date of birth for us because it is in line with our mission, with our vocation in life. And dare I say that if someone is born on Tisha B'Av, it is in line with his mission of planting seeds of redemption within each and every moment of suffering, of knowing how to infuse hope and faith into our surroundings, even though all people can see is despair. It's knowing how to become beacons of light, even though we are surrounded by darkness. So I think that you being born on Tisha B'Av is in line with that mission of Tisha B'Av, of creating laughter like Rabbi Akiva did, even though we're surrounded by such ruins, such destruction. It's you being that beacon of light, even though, again, all people can see is darkness. So it's a happy day. It's a great day to be born on Tisha B'Av. And I will add one more thing. The Talmud says that the Mashiach was born on Tisha B'Av. That's his birthday. Now, don't get too ahead of yourself. You might or might not be Mashiach. That's not what I'm suggesting. But what I'm suggesting is that you share the same birthday as Mashiach. But what the Talmud is really saying is that, again, God planted Mashiach in the saddest day of the year to teach us and to teach you maybe more, even more than to teach the rest of us, that within the sadness of the day, there is great happiness. There is the birth of the Mashiach. There is your birth. And your task in life is maybe indeed to bring that Mashiach, that laughter to your surroundings and eventually to the entire world. So that's the answer to this question. Next question. Dear Rabbi, I am enjoying our Zoom services very much, but I have to ask you, why is it that Jews pray so much? Is it 3 times a day? Why? Does God really need all of our prayers? So it's a good question. Let me relate to the first part of the question. I'm enjoying our Zoom services very much. Indeed, if you haven't had the chance yet of joining us for our Zoom services, it's time to join us. They are the most, I mean, I might be subjective, but you can ask any one of the attendants, but they are really inspiring. They give us that boost to start the day in a spiritual real, in a good, fresh, new, and a happy way. So please join our Zoom services as this person here is mentioning. But the question was not just that he's enjoying our Zoom services very much, but really, does God need us to pray 3 times a day? Does he need all of our prayers? That was the answer, the question. And I'll give a 2-part answer to this. So first part is that on a simple level, God is a good educator. God is a good parent. When we tell our children after they receive the gift, hey, did you say thank you for that gift? We're not being a nuisance to our children. We're just trying to be good educators. Same for God. God is trying to be a good educator. When he tells us, hey, say thank you for the life that you received today, he's trying to infuse in us the quality of thankfulness, of gratefulness. a quality that I think is most necessary and is synonymous, in my humble opinion, to happiness. If you're grateful, you'll be happy. If you're ungrateful, you'll be sad. So what God is saying, I pray 3 times a day. He's saying to us, please be grateful. I'm trying to educate you. Be grateful to the source of it all, to God himself. And by being grateful, you'll also have many other blessings that will come with that gratefulness, like happiness, as just mentioned. That's on the simple level. But to answer on the deeper level, does God really need us to pray so many times? Maybe not. But we need to pray so many times. We need it for ourselves. Maybe God does not need it from us all the time, but we need it for ourselves. Why so? To imbue in us this idea that we live a 2-dimensional life, not a 1-dimensional life. There is a God with us all the time. There is our plan, but there is God's plan. If we are not aware of that plan of God, if we don't ask ourselves, as we do in prayer, what is it that you want from us, God? Then when our plan is not actualized, we'll become more frustrated. Oh gosh, I missed that meeting and I shouldn't have. Gosh, the doctor made me wait for 2 hours in his lobby, and that's not right. It's a waste of my time. 1 second, but what about God's plan for me? Maybe God has a plan for you in that lobby room. Maybe God has a plan for you when you miss that meeting. Maybe he wants you to do something else, that's something more burning and more important. And by praying, what we are doing is that we are, again, inculcating within us that we are living a 2-dimensional life. It's not just about us, it's about God. And each time I pray, and I pray 3 times a day, and we'll explain why 3 times a day, but we say to God, hey, I recognize you're here with me. I'm here with you. Let's now face this day together. I'll ask what you want from me, and you'll also have me in mind, what my desires and what my needs are, and we'll make the perfect partnership. We'll make that great team that can face life's hardships and joys together. So that's really the big idea of prayer, and that's why we pray so many times, to continue to live with God and to have God live with us in this 2-dimensional life that we are leading. Now, why 3 times a day? I think we've explained this in the past, but very briefly, we open up the day with prayer in order to say to ourselves, hey, we're connecting yet to something great, so that if we fall low during the day, we'll have something high carrying us. That's to start off the day on a higher plane. That gives us that sense that we are with God and that God is with us, and then no matter what we face during the day, then we'll be absorbable, so to speak. That's number 1, the first prayer. Second prayer is mincha, is in the middle of the day, so that when we do fall into the pits of life, and we're immersed in so many things and are distracted by so many different, are pulled in so many different directions, we pause. In the middle of the day, we pray mincha, and we say, hey, God, I know you're still with me. Yes, the day has overcome me, but we're in this together. Please continue to be with me and bless me in all that I need. And then at the end of the day, we pray again, arvit. We pray the evening prayer to say to God, look, thank you for being with me today. I'm going to sleep with you. Whatever happened, I know was divine. Some things I can't see the divinity in them, but I know I have to believe that they're divine. And I'm asking you to come and sleep with me, so that in the morning I wake up with you at my side, ready to face yet another day filled with divinity. So that's really the big idea of praying 3 times a day. But we need prayer more than God needs it from us. That's the deeper answer to this question. Next question. This is a question about a specific psalm, Psalm 3. So I'll relate to it briefly, but it says in that psalm, in Psalm 3:3, it says, many say of me. This is King David speaking about how people are speaking about themselves, about him. Many say of me, King David says. But in any case, the commentaries, as the question here points out, note that of me refers to the soul, and it is to be understood as a person's self, a living being. They say it is not the same as the spiritual connotation we ascribe to the soul today. Do you agree? And if so, I'd love to understand the difference. So I know it's a technical question, but I want to answer so that everyone can really relate to the answer. But it brings to mind the story of the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who raised his grandson because his grandson was orphaned at a young age. So he was in charge of raising him. The grandson became the Tzemach Tzedek, also a big Hasidic Rebbe, Menachem Mendel. The late Lubavitcher Rebbe, by the way, was named after him. the Tzemach Tzedek. But in any case, when he was a young boy, he was raised by his grandfather, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. And one day his grandfather decided to play a game with his grandson, Menachem Mendel, as he was sitting on his laps. And he said to him, Menachem Mendel, my grandson, where is grandpa? Efo Saba, where is grandpa? And the young grandchild pointed to grandpa's head. And the grandpa responded, no, that's not grandpa. That's his head. It's not grandpa. So then the grandchild went to the heart and he said, here's grandpa. And he said, no, that's not grandpa. That's grandpa's heart. But it's not grandpa. Now he was confused. The grandchild was confused. But he was brilliant already from a very young age. So what he did, he left the room. He left the laps of his grandfather. He left the room. And from outside of the room, he called out to his grandfather. He said, Zaidi, grandpa. And grandpa says, yes, how can I help you? And the grandchild said, oh, do you see, that's grandpa. I called you, you answered, that's grandpa. Now, it's a cute Hasidic story, but it has within it, I think, such great meaning and such great treasures for life in general. Question is, how do we define ourselves? Do we define ourselves by our head, by intellect, by our heart, by emotion, by what we feel, by what we think? René Descartes says, cogito ergo sum. I am, therefore I think. Really? Is that what makes you I am? Your thoughts? Other people say, no, I feel, therefore I am. No, do feelings make you are? No, not necessarily. Feelings come and go, thoughts come and go. So what defines you? If you were to ask someone in the street today, who are you? You know what they would do? They'd give you their business card. They'd say, yeah, this is who I am, my profession. But is that you? What do you do? So what if you're a doctor? What do you do? The other times of the day when you're not doctoring, who are you then? Or some people define themselves, we live in a society where we define ourselves sometimes by race. So I am black, I am white, I'm Caucasian. Is that you? What about the deeper you? That's just the color of your skin. What about you? And you can define yourself also by your sexual orientation. I'm homosexual, I'm lesbian, I'm straight. Is that you? Who are you? Is that you? What about the other gifts? The talents you have? What about the skill? What about you, the real you? And that was the real question this grandfather was asking his grandchild. Where is Saba? Now, when the grandchild went outside and called Saba, Zaidi, come. Then he called to the very soul of his grandpa. Then that attachment between the grandchild and the grandfather came alive. That attachment is what makes the grandfather the ultimate grandfather. That's what his essence is all about. Who I am is my soul. That's who I am, my infinite soul. My soul that's connected to my loved ones. My soul that yearns to grow and to become more spiritual. My soul that yearns to do good. My soul that yearns to pray. My soul that knows that impossibility is illusion. Everything is possible if we just set our minds to it. Everything good is possible if we just set our minds to it. That's what our soul is. That's who we truly are. Now, when King David, to answer the question, when King David speaks about me, he's referring to the outside me. People are speaking about me, but they don't know that real me. That's why they're only speaking about the outside me. Here in this context of 3:3, he's really referring to the outside me. But the real me of King David is really what King David refers to as nafshi, my soul. In Psalm 61, for example, it said, Sama lecha nafshi, my soul is thirsty for you. That's the real me. And that's the way we, each and every one of us here, ought to define ourselves, not by a business, by a profession, not by the color of our skin, not by sexual orientation, or by however else we sometimes define ourselves. But we ought to define ourselves really by our souls. That's who we are. When we look at our mirror, we should see infinity. We should see endless potential. That's who we are. That's really what defines us. And dare I say once again, what I've said in the past, that if there's something in the English language I could change, then I would do it immediately. And I would ask your help to do that. Is that it's fascinating to me that when we speak of physical diseases, we say, I have a cold, I have the flu, I have the coronavirus, God forbid. But when we speak of mental diseases, we say, I am schizophrenic, I am ADHD, I am bipolar, whatever it may be. Why is it that we define ourselves by mental diseases, it's beyond me. Why can't we say I have when it comes to mental diseases as we do with physical diseases? I don't know, but that's something we ought to change. Should be very, very careful in the way we use the words I am. No, what we are is not our profession. It's not our mental disease. It's not our whatever. What we are is our soul. I think that's why God created the mosque, not just to protect us from the coronavirus, but also so that we can stop judging ourselves by our external features and really force ourselves to look inward and finally define ourselves by our soul. I am, who are you? I am a soul, nothing else. That's what the mosque wants us to do. That's what God wants us to do. That's how God wants us to define ourselves. And that's how King David defines himself too in the book of Psalms, as this question relates to.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Rabbi, this is Joyce.
Yes, Joyce.
Can I share just a little story of something you just said?
Sure.
It triggered a very important memory. Excuse me. About soul to soul and how the connection. When I was working in Hawaii, I worked with children who were in residential program, pre-adjudicated. In other words, trying to help them. Their parents sometimes were in another island, and sometimes they were in prison. So I used to say that we're working with the invisible parent, but they were not really. So we would have a session, and one session you just reminded me came to life. Right. When I called this mother, and all she ever heard was bad things about her son. So and the boy was with me. I made sure so we were not at any physical distance, but I was thinking of her as a mother, and he was the son. And I just said, hello, so-and-so, I'm Auntie Joyce. I always called myself Auntie Joyce, and I'm with your precious son now. And I want you to know how special he is. And I started to say something really that I knew was very good about him. And she just sobbed.
Very good.
And I said, please remember you are his mother. And the boy cried. And it was such a connection that there was no distance. It was a soul connection that could not be broken.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I think that's our duty, right? Both as parents, as healers, as educators in general. That is to focus much more on the good and on the soul connection, like you're saying, than on the external stuff. It's interesting to me. It's quite ironic to me, and I mentioned this also in the past, how parents sometimes come and complain to me how terrible the children are, and then they say, oh, well, we saw that those traits from a very young age. And I say to myself, gosh, well, if that's all you could focus on at a young age, no wonder he turned terrible. But if we were to focus on better and greater traits, on what truly defines them, on their soul again, then maybe they would have turned out differently. Or maybe at least now they could turn out differently. Maybe there's a path now because all you can see is goodness. But that's why the Baal Shem Tov would say that if there is a child who deviated from the right path, then the only response to that is to love them more. Why? That's because when we love them more, what we are doing is that we're focusing on the goodness in them. That's what love is. And when we focus on the goodness in them, then they'll focus on the goodness in them too. And that will bring them back to the right path. All right. Thank you for sharing that, Joyce. Next question. And this is the final question I received for this week. Dear Rabbi, my son just got engaged to a wonderful Jewish girl. Thank God. We adore her, and she's the best thing that has ever happened to him. But there's one issue. She has zero interest in Judaism. Although I invite her to join my classes, to bake challah with me, and to celebrate our holidays together, she almost always refuses. What do you think I can do to spark an interest for Judaism in her? So good question. I'll give a multi-layered answer. First layer is, what can you do? I would say in one word, do nothing. Do nothing. What I mean is that instead of inviting her to classes and telling her to come bake challah with you, etc., just do it yourself. Model it. There's nothing more that inspires people than the modeling of goodness. If you model, especially in the context of families, if you model Judaism as a source of tremendous light and joy to you, that will be contagious, and she'll come around. That's number one. Number two, so that's one layer, and I can't overemphasize that layer. I think it's true for parents too. You know, unfortunately, the American model is a terrible model where we say to our children, oh, you go to Hebrew school, you do this, you do your bar mitzvah, and you work hard for it. I don't have to do any of that. I think that creates not just dichotomy and complete destruction in our child's eyes because, oh, that's not right. My parent is forcing me to do something that he himself is not doing. But not only that, but that also eventually creates this terrible taste towards Judaism. And Judaism is about, you know, essentially it's about a double life. Yeah, on the outside in the synagogue, you have to do that. You have to be a bar mitzvah. You have to learn Hebrew in the Hebrew school or whatever it is. But on the inside, you really don't have to do anything. And I think that when we model Judaism, when we embrace it, when we own it our own selves, and we bring it into the home, then that heals those tears that are created by that American model. And in a way, I think it inspires our children then to follow suit and to be themselves what you have modeled yourself to be. That's number one. A second answer to that is that, look, I'd like to continue this conversation. I'm turning to this person that chose to remain anonymous. And I'd like to understand also the chemistry in the family, because very often that has a lot to do with the chemistry, and maybe there's an experience, the way she experienced Judaism and her youth was very negative and therefore she rejects it. And I'd like to understand better the situation too. Sometimes that has to be challenged and rectified. But I will say this, and I think that this is yet another answer to that. Your daughter-in-law is your daughter-in-law. She's not your daughter. And I know that we don't recognize that sometimes, especially the typical Jewish mother. I mean, I have a mother-in-law, and my wife has a mother-in-law, my own mother, and we all have mother-in-laws, and sometimes mother-in-laws can be overarching and very suffocating. Of course, out of love. They only come from good intentions. But I think it also relates, and that's another layer I would say, it relates to the question of what is your role as a mother-in-law? What is your role? And I think that the best role of a mother-in-law, and in general of healthy relationships, not just between in-laws, but even between spouses, is that you know how to love, but you also know how to maintain your distance. You know how to come close, but you know how to give space. You know how to respect. You know how to say, you know what, that's their own space. That's their own decision. They're old enough to make their own choices. I can impose anything on them. And I think that in a way, the more that respect is created, the more the communication flows. And the better the communication then becomes. I think once you said that, in this question, you said that your son just got engaged, which means that your relationships yet haven't been established fully. So I think you first need to establish the position of respect, of respecting the other fully, not just loving, but also respecting, which means knowing also when to stay distant, when to give your own space. Once you've established that, I have no doubt that the communication then will flow, and then the Jewish topics can be brought. I will mention Maimonides, who says that Keshem shemitzvah lomar davar shenishma, kach mitzvah shelo lomar davar shelo nishma, which means that just as it is a mitzvah to say something that is heard, so it is a mitzvah not to say something that cannot be heard. If I'm not in a place of listening to others, no matter how many people will be speaking to me and who will be speaking to me, it could be the dearest people in my life speaking to me. If I'm not in a place of listening to others, then I won't hear anything. And then those people will just bring me agony and distress. And therefore, just as it is a mitzvah to say something that is heard, so too it is sometimes a mitzvah to keep quiet, to not say something that is not heard. She's in a position that she can't hear anything right now. Hopefully that will change with the establishment of your relationship as mentioned. Then maybe the mitzvah is for you to keep quiet. And that silence in and of itself is a mitzvah, so be comforted by that. The third and final layer I will say is that I think that the best moments of education are moments in which, that are called in the educational slang, teachable moments, right? That are moments in which we don't say anything, but rather a question is asked and then we say something. In other words, we don't initiate the conversation. We just become a participant in that conversation. What I mean by that, maybe the best example is an example again by a Hasidic Rebbe who was once walking with his father, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, who was walking with his father, Rabbi Shalom Beer, as a young boy in a park. And all of a sudden, Yosef Yitzchak went and he tore a leaf off the tree. And his father said to him, you know, you should know that you shouldn't do that in life, because even leaves have souls. And you just killed that life of the leaf and killed that soul. And Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak wrote a diary and he recounted that story. And he wrote that this was one of the most important lessons he's ever learned in life. And I asked myself, why is that the case? That was really the most, fine, yes, leaves have lives, have souls. Is that really one of the most important lessons of life? And I think that the answer is simply because of the genius of Rabbi Shalom Beer, of his father. See, his father could have taught him that leaves had lives, have souls, in school, at home, over dinner. But he didn't, because he knew better. He knew that if he was going to teach that lesson over dinner, if he was going to initiate that lesson himself, it may have registered, but it may have not made a deep impact. So what did he do, Rabbi Shalom Beir, the father? He waited for a teachable moment. He said, this lesson is important for me and for my son to learn. So I'm going to wait. I'm not going to teach it over dinner. I'm going to wait for that moment to happen. When that moment happened, when he actually tore a leaf off a tree, that's when he taught the lesson. And that's why it became one of the most impactful lessons that Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak had ever heard in his life. Because it did not come from the father, it came from the son. The father just used that moment, that teachable moment, then to infuse an important lesson. I think it's true in education in general. I think it's true for your daughter-in-law too, your future daughter-in-law. They just got engaged, you say, that maybe you have to wait for those teachable moments. Instead of being the initiator of the conversation, saying, come bake challah with me, come to this class with me, come do that with me. Maybe wait for her to open up about Judaism. Maybe wait for her to say, hey, I'm thirsty for some guidance, for some spiritual guidance, for some meaning in life. Then you can say, oh, by the way, I heard about this class, come. Maybe that will provide answers to your questions. Sometimes the best teachings are done in moments that await us, that we don't create, but moments that are created for us. That's when the best teachings of life come through. And that's yet
Rabbi,
another answer I can give this person. Just one more thing, Randy, I will say this, and you mentioned, just to conclude the answer here, you mentioned that your son just got engaged to this girl. I don't know where your son stands as far as Judaism is also, but I'm sure that if your son is judging from you, from where he comes from the tree this apple comes from, right? If he's as engaged and as passionate about Judaism, I'm sure that your son also and his relationship with her eventually will have its impact, its effect, and they'll influence each other for the good. So that's another thing to keep in mind also. All right, friends, I'm sorry. Randy, go ahead. I'll open this up to any other questions you may have.
what you just said about teachable moments and the leaf falling from the tree, it reminds me about what's happening in our society today regarding Nick Cannon and Ice Cube, who both made anti-Semitic remarks. And instead of the Jewish community shaming them, two different Jews reached out to both of them, and they are forging a relationship, and they're learning about Judaism, and it's going to benefit us as a Jewish people.
Right.
Shaming people, support them and educate them. That's what's most important, I think, is to educate them.
I couldn't agree more. And I think I commend these Jews who reached out to Nick Cannon and are teaching him now about the Holocaust. He also said he'll visit Israel, the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. I think these are teachable moments that have to be savored and seized. And they were by these great Jews. So thank you, Randy, for mentioning this. I will say this, that, one of my great models is the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, blessed memory. And he, for many years, had a very big argument that was made famous between, regarding what to do with Jews trapped in the Iron Curtain under communist Russia. Many Jews were saying, well, we have to impose on the Russians and we have to demonstrate in the streets and we have to apply world pressure and eventually they'll break. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, who by the way came from Russia, and he himself was responsible for the whole underground schools of Judaism, of Torah, of mitzvahs mikvahs, synagogues. People that were loyal to him went and sacrificed their lives to ensure Jewish continuity in Russia. He himself said, no, that's not the right way to work with the Russians. And I believe that he also believed that that's not the right way to work in life altogether. To impose things from the outside usually doesn't work. You have to go from within, speak to them on a one-on-one level, behind curtains, behind the scene, develop a relationship with them. And once you've developed it, then your request will come in a much impactful way, much more impactful way. What I'm saying by that again is, if it's true on a grand scale, on in relationships of the world, then it's certainly true for our own intimate one-on-one relationships, for the relationships we have with our children, with our family, with our daughters-in-law to be. We first have to wait for those teachable moments to arrive, and they will arrive through developing and nurturing our relationships with them in a respectful way, and then we can share with them our education in a way that will be indeed most impactful.